What drives a man to murder the very people who loved him the most? A mother, a brother, a sister, all gone in one night of unspeakable violence. This isn't just a story of murder. It's a haunting descent into resentment, jealousy, and a broken mind. The case of Nathan Cole will leave you questioning just how well we really know the people closest to us. Welcome to Crime and Consequence, the channel where we uncover the darkest truths behind real-life crimes. If you're new here, thank you for joining our community of inquisitive minds. Your support means everything, and to our returning subscribers, we truly appreciate you for being part of this journey. To understand the chilling story of Nathan Cole, the man who killed his mother and two siblings in cold blood, we have to dig deeper into the tangled web of resentment, family dynamics, and the shocking moments that led to a night of unimaginable horror. In a quiet suburb of Birmingham, UK, what appeared to be an ordinary family home became the center of a horrifying crime scene, a triple murder that would shake the entire community. The serene streets, once filled with the laughter of children and the comforting routines of suburban life, were now marked by the flashing lights of police cars and the whispers of shocked neighbors. What was once a place of warmth and safety had been transformed into a scene of unimaginable horror. The calm of the neighborhood, where neighbors exchanged greetings and children played freely, was shattered as the grim discovery unfolded, leaving the small community in disbelief. The once calm setting quickly became ground zero for an investigation that would uncover chilling details. Behind the neatly kept garden and the seemingly perfect family facade, a dark and twisted reality had been looming. The questions began to surface immediately. How could something so horrific occur in such a peaceful neighborhood? Who could be responsible for such a brutal act? As law enforcement worked tirelessly to piece together the details of the crime, the residents of the quiet suburb were left grappling with the unsettling truth that the tragedy had struck in their own backyard, forever altering the once peaceful landscape of their lives. The suspect, 28-year-old Nathan Cole, shocked authorities when he calmly confessed to killing his mother, Margaret Cole, 54, and his younger siblings, Daniel, 16, and Emily, 12. The bodies of the victims were discovered by a neighbor who had grown concerned after days of eerie silence emanated from the usually lively household. This neighbor, feeling something was amiss, decided to check on the family, only to be met with a sight that would forever haunt the community. The chilling discovery of 3 lifeless bodies in the otherwise quiet home sent shockwaves through the suburb, turning the once peaceful neighborhood into a place of dread and disbelief. The Coles were well known in the community as a quiet, hard-working family who kept to themselves. They were often seen as pillars of the neighborhood, living an ordinary life that others admired for its simplicity and stability. Nathan's confession, delivered without visible emotion, shattered the entire town's understanding of this seemingly perfect family dynamic. As news spread, the impossible question echoed through the minds of many. How could a son, who had grown up in this very home, be capable of such a monstrous act against his own flesh and blood? This tragedy forced everyone to confront the terrifying reality that evil could lurk even in the most unsuspecting places, leaving the community to search for answers that may never fully explain the incomprehensible actions of Nathan Cole. According to police reports, Nathan's confession was as chilling as the crime itself. He walked into the station with an eerie calmness, his blood-stained hands placed deliberately on the counter. Without emotion, he uttered the words that would haunt the investigation. "I killed them all." The simplicity of his statement left the officers momentarily stunned as they processed the gravity of his words. In that moment, the room seemed to grow heavy with the weight of what was being confessed. The starkness of Nathan's admission was not accompanied by any visible signs of remorse or distress, which only amplified the unsettling nature of the crime. What made the confession even more chilling was the unrepentant tone in Nathan's voice. There was no plea for help, no breakdown of emotion, only a cold, calculated declaration that suggested the darkness within him had been festering long before that fateful day. The officers could sense that this was not the result of a momentary lapse in judgment or a fit of rage. It was as if Nathan had meticulously planned the murders, his cold demeanor betraying a deep-seated turmoil that had been brewing beneath the surface for months, if not longer. His calmness during the confession raised more questions than answers, leaving investigators to ponder the disturbing reality of how someone could commit such a heinous act with such apparent detachment. The motive behind Nathan's horrific actions was a tangled web of resentment, jealousy, and deep-seated frustration. As the eldest son, Nathan had always felt the weight of expectations. But after moving back into the family home following the collapse of his relationship and an ongoing struggle with unemployment, those expectations began to feel like suffocating burdens. Every passing day in the familiar yet stifling environment only deepened his sense of isolation. His frustrations with life, compounded by a lack of purpose and direction, began to spiral. What once may have been fleeting moments of bitterness gradually evolved into a toxic resentment that consumed him. Nathan felt trapped in a cycle of hopelessness, unable to break free from the anger that seemed to seep into every aspect of his life. Investigations uncovered that one of Nathan's most painful sources of resentment was his belief that his mother favored his younger siblings, Daniel and Emily. Daniel, with his aspirations of becoming a professional football player, and Emily, a bright, ambitious student with dreams of becoming a doctor, were often the subjects of praise and attention. To Nathan, their success and potential only highlighted his own failures, deepening his feelings of inadequacy. The achievements of his siblings became unbearable reminders of everything he had not accomplished, turning envy into rage. This simmering resentment, amplified by his feelings of neglect and alienation, eventually reached a breaking point, leading him to commit the unthinkable. For Nathan, the perceived favoritism was not just a familial issue. It became the catalyst for an outburst of violence that would forever alter the course of his life and the lives of those around him. Margaret, a dedicated and hard-working nurse, had always been focused on securing a brighter future for her younger children. Her long hours at the hospital were fueled by her desire to provide for her family, and she took immense pride in Daniel's athletic talents and Emily's academic ambitions. Margaret believed in pushing her children to succeed, often showering them with encouragement and support as they pursued their dreams. However, in Nathan's eyes, this constant attention towards his younger siblings left him feeling overlooked and neglected. While Margaret's love and guidance were directed towards fostering Daniel and Emily's growth, Nathan's personal struggles, his battle with unemployment, failed relationships, and mounting frustrations seemed to go unnoticed. The emotional void created by his perceived exclusion from the family's focus only deepened the resentment brewing inside him, amplifying the growing chasm between him and his mother. The breaking point came when Margaret, recognizing the destructive path Nathan was on, confronted him about his worsening drinking habits and lack of contribution to the household. She insisted that he take responsibility and contribute to the household expenses, an ultimatum that felt like a harsh rejection of his already fragile self-worth. This confrontation, which might have been a routine family discussion for others, struck Nathan with the force of an emotional avalanche. The frustration that had been building for months, if not years, came to a head in that moment. For Nathan, his mother's demand felt like the final insult, a glaring reminder of his perceived failure and worthlessness. This exchange became the spark that ignited his murderous intent, sending him spiraling into a dark, calculated rage. What had once been a simmering resentment soon turned into an obsession, as Nathan began to meticulously plan the unthinkable, seeing the horrific act as a way to regain control and make his presence felt in a world that had seemed to marginalize him. On the night of the killings, the normally quiet neighborhood was shattered by the sound of loud arguments echoing through the house. Raised voices full of tension and anger cut through the calm, though no one could have predicted the horrific events that were about to unfold. Neighbors reported hearing a commotion, but it was nothing out of the ordinary, a domestic dispute that was unfortunately all too familiar in troubled households. However, no one imagined that the voices raised in anger would be followed by the brutal violence that soon erupted. Inside the house, the tension reached a boiling point, and Nathan, fueled by years of resentment and frustration, began his deadly assault. According to his statement, he first attacked his mother, Margaret, in the living room, strangling her with a belt in a ruthless and calculated manner. The violence was swift and unforgiving, leaving Margaret with no opportunity to defend herself or cry out for help. After killing his mother, Nathan turned his focus to his younger siblings. He moved to Daniel's room and, in a fit of uncontrollable rage, repeatedly stabbed him in the chest, each strike driven by years of jealousy and anger. But it was his encounter with Emily, who had tried to hide in a closet, that added a haunting layer to the brutal sequence of events. The young girl, terrified for her life, begged Nathan for mercy, pleading with him to spare her, but her cries fell on deaf ears. Nathan, consumed entirely by his rage and resentment, showed no compassion or hesitation. In that moment, As he stood over his frightened sister, there was no turning back. The violence that had been carefully building in his mind for so long culminated in this final chilling act. Nathan's unrelenting anger had left him blind to the humanity of his victims, sealing the tragic fate of his family. What stunned investigators most was Nathan's complete lack of remorse, a chilling indifference that left everyone involved in the case shaken. During his confession, there was no trace of emotional turmoil, no signs of the remorse or guilt that might typically accompany such a heinous act. His words were cold, detached and dispassionate, as though he was recounting a mundane event, far removed from the brutal murders he had just committed. There were no tears, no regret in his voice, only a vacant stare and a calm, almost clinical recounting of the horrific events he had carried out. His demeanor was so unsettling that it raised more questions than answers, leaving the police to wonder if they were dealing with a remorseless killer or someone suffering from a deep psychological disturbance. Nathan's calmness in the face of his crimes defied logic and left a dark mark on the investigation. Psychologists who later studied Nathan's behavior speculated that he might have been suffering from undiagnosed mental health issues, but no formal diagnosis was ever confirmed. His chilling indifference and inability to show any signs of guilt seemed to suggest something far more disturbing than a simple act of violence driven by anger. Some experts hypothesized that Nathan's emotional detachment could be linked to deeper psychological trauma or a mental illness that had gone unnoticed or untreated. Regardless, the complete lack of empathy he displayed during his confession left both the police and the public grappling with the terrifying possibility that someone could commit such brutal acts without any visible signs of remorse. The idea that a person could be so emotionally detached from the suffering of others sent shockwaves through the community, leaving many to question the true nature of Nathan's psyche and the forces that had driven him to commit such a horrific crime. The trial that followed was both swift and brutal, unfolding with a sense of inevitability. Nathan's defense attorney sought to paint a picture of a man who had been emotionally neglected for years, arguing that this prolonged neglect had pushed him to a mental breaking point. The defense attempted to portray Nathan as someone starved for affection and trapped in a cycle of deep emotional pain, spiraling into darkness as a result of the unresolved trauma from his past. The hope was that this narrative might elicit some degree of sympathy or understanding from the jury, suggesting that his violent outburst was the result of a broken mind rather than premeditated malice. However, the jury, faced with the horrific nature of the murders and Nathan's emotionless, detached confession, found it impossible to show any leniency. The brutal reality of his actions and his chilling indifference to the suffering of his family members overshadowed any attempt at justifying his crime as the product of emotional neglect. Despite the defense's arguments, Nathan was found guilty on all 3 counts of first-degree murder, with no mitigating factors considered sufficient to warrant a lesser sentence. The courtroom grew tense as the verdict was read aloud, the weight of Nathan's crimes settling over the room like a heavy fog. His fate was sealed, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The silence that followed the announcement spoke volumes, as both the victims' families and the public grappled with the horror of the crime and the chilling reality that Nathan, despite his defense, had planned and executed the murders with calculated precision. For those who had followed the case closely, the verdict provided little comfort. A sense of finality settled over the trial, but it could not undo the damage done to the Cole family or erase the haunting memory of the brutal killings. The Cole family home, which once symbolized warmth and the comfort of family life, now stands as an eerie monument to the tragedy that occurred within its walls. The vibrant energy that once filled the house with laughter and love has been replaced by a heavy, unsettling silence. The windows are darkened, with curtains drawn tight, shutting out both the light and the life that once existed inside. It is as if the house itself mourns, an unspoken reminder of the horrors that unfolded there. The vibrant neighborhood that once flourished around the Coles is now tinged with a somber mood, as the house continues to stand as a painful symbol of the darkness that can lurk behind closed doors. The once familiar and inviting structure has become a chilling testament to a family's unthinkable loss, with each passing day adding another layer to the grief that still hangs over the community. Friends and neighbors are left struggling to comprehend the unfathomable violence that erupted in such an unexpected place. How could a son, someone they had known as part of their community, commit such brutal acts against his own family? The questions remain unanswered, hanging in the air like a dark cloud, adding to the collective sorrow. The community is still reeling from the shock, unable to make sense of the events that shattered the tranquility of their suburban lives. Many are left with an overwhelming sense of disbelief as they try to come to terms with the fact that the person they once saw as a familiar neighbor is now a convicted killer. The grief is compounded by the haunting mystery of Nathan's motives and the unsettling thought that something so monstrous could be hidden in plain sight. The Cole family's home stands as a constant reminder of this tragedy, its empty, sorrowful silence amplifying the questions that may never have answers. As the judge delivered the final verdict, the courtroom watched in tense silence, waiting for any sign of emotion from Nathan. However, he showed nothing. His face remained impassive, his gaze fixed somewhere in the distance, as if he were disconnected from the gravity of the moment. There was no sign of regret, no glimmer of remorse, just an empty stare that conveyed an unsettling sense of detachment. His lack of reaction in the face of the verdict only deepened the unease that had already settled over the room. It was a stark contrast to the tears, pleas, and emotional turmoil that are often seen in trials of such magnitude. Instead, Nathan's blank stare seemed to reinforce the chilling reality that the man standing before the court was no longer the son his mother had raised. The humanity he once shared with his family seemed to have evaporated long before the tragic murders, leaving behind only a cold, lifeless shell that could not be penetrated by guilt or sorrow. This emotionless behavior reinforced the haunting notion that Nathan's transformation into a killer was not a sudden descent into madness, but rather the final stage of a long, hidden deterioration of his psyche. The boy Margaret had once known, the son who had played in the family home, had seemingly vanished. In his place was a man who, despite his horrific actions, could not muster the basic human emotions of grief or shame. It was as if, over time, he had become increasingly disconnected from the world around him, unable to form the emotional connections that had once made him part of the family. His cold indifference throughout the trial left everyone, from the judge to the victim's loved ones, with a chilling image of a man completely severed from any form of empathy or compassion. The hollow stare he offered in place of remorse only intensified the sense that Nathan's humanity had been lost long before the brutal killings, leaving a terrifying void in its wake. The question that continues to haunt the community is one that many cannot easily answer. How did no one see the signs? As the full scope of Nathan's actions became clear, neighbors, friends, and even extended family began to replay their past interactions with him in their minds, searching for any hint or warning that might have foreshadowed the tragedy. Could they have noticed the subtle signs of his growing frustration or isolation? Could there have been moments where Nathan's behavior or demeanor raised red flags that were either overlooked or dismissed as insignificant? In the wake of such a shocking event, it's only natural for those who knew him to question their own awareness and whether they missed an opportunity to intervene before things spiraled out of control. The unsettling realization is that, in hindsight, some may have seen traces of his inner turmoil, but it was so well concealed beneath a mask of normalcy that it went unnoticed. The tragic reality that emerges from this is that sometimes darkness festers quietly in the background, hidden beneath a fragile facade of everyday life. For those who knew Nathan, his outward appearance may have suggested that everything was fine. He seemed like any other young man facing the pressures of life. But beneath the surface, unresolved pain, resentment, and bitterness were quietly building. It's a stark reminder that violence does not always have an obvious outward sign. Sometimes it brews in silence, becoming more dangerous the longer it remains unchecked. The terrifying truth is that the eruption of such violence can come without warning, leaving those left behind grappling with the painful realization that the warning signs were there all along, yet they were concealed within a world that appeared deceptively normal. It is a harsh lesson for the community that sometimes the most horrific events unfold without any clear indication, leaving everyone to wonder if, somehow, they could have seen the darkness before it consumed everything.